Pam Bondi wasn't unfamiliar with the weight of pressure. Years of standing in the courtroom had toughened her, hardened her resolve in ways most could never understand. But today was different. As she walked into Judge Howard Gates's courtroom, there was a palpable tension in the air, thick with the knowledge that this would be no ordinary hearing. This case was bigger than most. A developer with the power to move mountains, politically speaking, was accused of misusing taxpayer funds to line his pockets. But it wasn't just the case that worried Pam. It was the man sitting behind the bench, Judge Gates, a figure notorious for his scathing remarks, his brutal demeanor, and a sense of power that could break even the most seasoned lawyers. Pam wasn't afraid, but she wasn't naive either. The moment she stepped into the courtroom, Gates hardly spared her a glance. He flipped through his papers with deliberate slowness, the silence in the room so thick it felt suffocating. Then, without looking up, he spoke. "Miss Bondi, I assume you've prepared something of substance today? Or should we skip ahead to the part where you waste my time?" A few chuckles rippled through the gallery, mostly from the defense's side. But Pam didn't flinch. She had dealt with worse. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but unwavering, "I believe the evidence will speak for itself." Judge Gates leaned back in his chair, feigning boredom. Taxpayer dollars, right? Because that's never been the basis for a frivolous case. The room fell silent. Bondi held his gaze, refusing to give an inch. "Respectfully, Your Honor, I would hardly call felony corruption charges frivolous." For a moment, their eyes locked, cold and calculating from his, unwavering from hers. Then, he interrupted her again, dismissing her with a scoff. "Mrs. Bondi, spare me the lectures. Just get to the point. I don't have all day to entertain whatever grandstanding you've planned." The words stung, but Pam didn't let him see the impact. She had come prepared, and she wasn't about to let anyone, including this judge, derail her focus. She reached for the folder in front of her, flipping it open and setting the documents on the table. "Your Honor, I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A. These financial records clearly demonstrate..." Judge Gates interrupted again, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do you always insist on drowning people in paperwork, or is this your way of compensating for something?" The audience shifted. Pam didn't react. She had faced bigger bullies than him. She was used to their tactics. She knew how to stand tall even when they tried to break her down. Her silence spoke louder than any retort ever could. But something was different now. As Pam continued with the case, she noticed it, the subtle shift in Gates's demeanor. His arrogance had a crack in it, a flicker of something darker underneath, something that told her this wasn't just a battle of words. This was a battle for something bigger. As she presented her evidence, financial discrepancies, unauthorized transactions, she felt the shift in the room. The defense attorney's smugness melted away. The jury was watching with rapt attention. The game had changed. Gates's face, once full of condescension, was now unreadable. He shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. And that's when it hit her. Gates wasn't just being difficult. He had something to hide. With one calculated move, she dropped the bombshell. A document, a signed ledger, and his signature. Her voice was calm but commanding as she said, "Your Honor, would you like to explain why your signature appears on an unauthorized financial transaction involving the defendant?" For a long, long moment, the room was still. You could hear a pin drop. Then, Gates's composure started to crack. He tried to dismiss it, to rule it inadmissible, but the room saw through it. Pam had him. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She knew this was only the beginning. The court was no longer his to command. And she wasn't backing down. Her next move was calculated, deliberate. A recording, his voice, a conversation, a threat. Every person in that courtroom heard it. And it wasn't just an ordinary conversation. It was proof. evidence that Judge Gates had been a part of something far darker than anyone had realized. And in that moment, it wasn't just a judge on trial. It was the system, the very core of the corruption that had protected the powerful for so long, coming undone. As the officers moved in, Pam didn't flinch. She didn't look away. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about personal glory. This was justice, and she was here to make sure it prevailed. The courtroom erupted as Judge Gates was escorted out, cuffs around his wrists, his world crumbling around him. For years, he had controlled the room. Now it was his turn to face the consequences. The defense attorney, once so sure of his position, now sat frozen, the smugness gone from his face. The developer, the powerful man who thought his connections could protect him, was no longer in control of the situation. He was shaking, unraveling in front of them all. Pam stood tall, unshaken, as the weight of the moment settled over the room. She didn't need to say anything more. Her actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. "Mr. Lawson," she said, turning toward the defendant, "would you like to continue with today's proceedings, or would you prefer to discuss a plea?" The silence was heavy. The power had shifted. The system was changing, and Pam Bondi was leading the charge. This was no longer just about one case. This was about holding the powerful accountable. It was about showing that no one, no matter how untouchable they believed themselves to be, was above the law. And as the courtroom settled into a new kind of quiet, one filled with hope and possibility, Pam knew this was just the beginning.